Hi, I'm Matthew Herzberg, and this is the Myopia Mindset. This is your weekly check-in for all things motivation, education, and inspiration on your path towards success with myopia management. And I made a promise to the audience when I first started this show that I was not going to be just interviewing clinicians, but also academics and industry professionals, because ever since I've been in this industry, I've always believed that myopia is an all hands on deck situation. We need everybody on board. We need everybody on the same page, and we all need to contribute to this problem. And my guest today is my first official interview with industry, and I'm super honored to have him. Tony Sommer is my guest. He has more than 20 years of leadership experience in vision care. He's held senior roles at Bausch & Lomb and Siva Vision, Visionary Technologies. And I know him best from his days as general manager of Specialty Eye Care Americas at Cooper Vision, where he led strategic growth and innovation across myopia management, orthokeratology, and specialty contact lenses. He is a super passionate advocate for advancing myopia management as the standard of care. He's been instrumental in supporting eye care professionals through education, product innovation, strategic partnerships, including his active contributions to the Global Myopia Awareness Coalition, helping to elevate awareness of myopia progression and its long-term impact on children's vision. And he was just recently announced as a strategic advisor for Treehouse Eyes. Tony, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I almost don't recognize myself. I'm flattered by all of that. Wow, I'm embarrassed.
Well, you've played such a pivotal role and made such huge contributions to this industry, and that's why I really wanted to have you on the show, because your experience and perspective is absolutely key, not just to like where we've been and how things are now, but what the next stages for our industry are. And I think there's a lot to learn from there. But before we get started, Tony, if anybody wants to reach out to you online and get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Well, I'm big on LinkedIn. So just go ahead and look me up on LinkedIn. And my last name is spelled Sommer. And just hit me up there and just DM me.
Perfect. And if you have any questions for me, or you're interested in the Myopia Mindset, please consider supporting us at myopiamindset.com or on our Substack. That's how you can do so. Tony, let's start at the very beginning of your entry into myopia management, because I wanted the audience to get a feel for where you've come from, because I think it adds so much credence to your perspective as far as where we're going into the future. So let's start there, if you don't mind. Like, how did you get into myopia management? What was your first like role in industry, and like your first big steps into, what is a very like confusing at times industry? You've always been this person who's been so genuine and passionate about myopia management. And that's really the key, in my opinion. You could have these people that you work with in industry where it's like, yes, they're showing up and doing a job, but it really helps to have someone who's super passionate. So let's start at the very beginning. How did you get into myopia management?
So getting into it, I actually came into optometry, right? So eye care, vision care, however you want to define it, different companies and different parts of the industry define it differently. But my whole attraction to both optometry and myopia management comes from my origin story, right? So I wear contact lenses, as people would expect, since I've always worked for contact lens companies. But I am a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. And when I went into the Air Force Academy, we were all guaranteed pilot slots. And I grew up and was a cadet, and I was going to be the world's greatest fighter pilot. And I'm obviously not. So what happened? Well, family has a history of myopia. High visual demand, in the dark in Colorado all the time. My eyesight worsened and I lost my pilot qualification. So I ended up flying an aircraft, but not flying the aircraft, so to speak. And much to my surprise, in 2016, when I was being recruited to join Visionary Technologies, did I find out that there's a whole field of science devoted to halting the progression of myopia or managing the progression of myopia. And I kept thinking to myself, oh my gosh, where was this in 1980 something when I was a young cadet, and something could have been done. for me. So my entire career has changed because of myopia and lack of myopia management and lack of awareness of it at that time. So that is my origin story into it. And I was recruited to visioneering, and I was fascinated. I was fascinated by two things, Matthew. First, that we could do something about myopia and myopia progression. And second, that so little was understood about it. And the cool thing, I was like employee number 7 at the time when I was recruited to VTI. And I said to myself, this is frontier science. Note, that's not a claim. I have the air quotes, but it's frontier science. Not much is known about it. Lots of great work on atropine. There's this thing that they call ortho-K. What does that stand for? I can't spell it. Again, I was at VTI. So, but not much was published on it. And you had some great leaders on it, but not much was known about it. Fast forward to today where there's thousands of papers and podium presentations. So that's what attracted me to it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's so important to, highlight that part of your origin story, because I think the docs who do best with myopia management in their practice have that personal experience to say, I could have really used this when I was a kid or growing up or whatever the case may be. And it sucks that it was not available. But the good news is that things are different and things can change now moving forward. So I love that part of your origin story. And I think it speaks a lot to, your level of passion and commitment for the industry. And, when you were coming on board with, VTI and part of this process, and you said you were employee number 7 or 6 or 7 or what, very early on. So I want you to go more into what it was like back then and how was the industry moving? Because from my perspective, it was kind of counterproductive back then. There was a lot of times where industry was shooting themselves in the foot. Clinicians were shooting themselves in the foot. There was huge arguments over what do we call orthokeratology, because it just rolls right off the tongue. You had CRT, VST, you had gentle molding, you had all these different names for it. So take us into that moment. What were the first big steps in that part of in that timeline for myopia from your perspective?
So again, it was I won't call it the Wild West, but it was so unstructured, I think is a good word for it. It was completely unstructured. And as a layperson, a non-clinician, a non-researcher, I was exposed to the entire academic literature, what is being said, what could be said. I had some great guideposts from my regulatory and clinical partners. And I was just fascinated by it all, because to me, though I was there to commercialize a product, a soft contact lens, and to do it without making claims that it wasn't indicated for in the United States, which there's no subterfuge there because it's used for presbyopia. So that was easy to market it for presbyopia. But though it's a product, it's this small sliver. What about the other ways to approach this mammoth problem? Brian Holden's paper had been published. We all knew what was going to happen. It's a huge, huge disease, and we're seeing it in the last 9 years. We've seen it grow and meet those predictions, maybe a little bit faster. But there were so many different ways to go about this. And that's, for me, was how do I understand more of the therapies? Again, being a product-focused person and a commercial person, how can I understand? I didn't consider the competitive set, but the other choices that an optometrist would have, or an ophthalmologist, but as we know, it's mainly optometry right now. And that really led me to a lot of research. And of course, this is before we had AI. So I actually had to go on Google. I actually had to meet with people like Professor Maria Liu, right? And listen to them talk about evidence-based medicine on something, whether it's atropine at that time. I learned a lot about atropine, or it was orthokeratology, which I didn't understand. But being from an engineering school, I'm like, oh, it's hydraulics, right? So and kind of understanding it as a layperson with my own frame of reference, understanding all the different ways to approach it. And then I sat back and I said, holy mackerel, if I'm an optometrist, how do I choose from all this? Right? Because there's so many different factors. There's evidence-based and non-evidence-based. There's, strict FDA regulation potentially, or the right to practice, right? Because it is a practice and falls under those rules. Or what would I do for a 7-year-old child that walked through the door today, right? And I had hundreds of conversations with optometrists around, oh, okay, tell me about your best patient case. And they go through it and they'd have a different answer each time. And that fascinated me. That fascinated me because it was a lot of retrospective analysis, to use the terms, right? Versus the RCTs, because we didn't have very many. We had the ATOM study and we had MySight, which I thought was, underutilized in the market as a commercial person, right? I'm like, you got this great paper and this great study that's ongoing. What more can we do with it? And then you got the ATOM study, and I could sit and listen to Jeff Walleen for hours talk about that. So for me, it was a lot of holy mackerel. How do I, as a person, deal with this? And then, of course, I was a parent because my wife is a -4. I'm a -550. I've got 3 kids. They're studious. What do I do? How do I approach this as a parent and not just as a commercial leader of one particular product segment? So in the early days, there was not much, no kidding, papers and studies. You had great leading thinkers around it and you could listen to them. And then I put myself in the shoes of an optometrist. What would I do? Right. Rational thinker. What would I do? I even talked to my primary care physician. How do you approach things like this? And he gave me great insight about it. He's like, well, you're the doctor. You take in all the inputs, you look at the patient in front of you, and then you make the best choice for them based on the outcome you want. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love it.
Fascinating time.
It was a very fascinating time. Like, I remember the very, very early days of other ophthalmologists being like, this is unethical. You shouldn't do this with children. And then we got to a point where it was like, okay, well, we're no longer having that conversation, but the new conversation we're having is we're having trouble pulling these hesitant eye care providers off the sidelines because they're saying, well, when I have the studies, show me the studies. When we have the studies, then I'll start doing something about it. And the docs that I was working with, the men and women at the Ortho K Academy, were saying, we can't wait. We have to do something now. And I have to imagine it's got to be exceptionally challenging for you to design product strategy to address all of these different, tumultuous aspects of myopia. And you had mentioned talking to, many different eye care providers and getting so many different perspectives. So how did you take all of that information and then start to design a product strategy around it? Because it sounds almost impossible, from an on-paper perspective. You have so many different points of view, so many different aspects, so much resistance. So if you can go into that, how do you design product strategy?
So there are several different filters that you can use based on your training and your education. So I came into the corporate world as a brand marketer for General Mills, and they teach you there. General Mills is a cereal and baking goods company. So I worked on yogurt, ice cream, frozen yogurt. I've worked on cake mix and frosting, and I worked on NASCAR. Vastly different products with different consumer targets. And we spoke to consumers. So it was a big advertising time. And that has influenced how I view the world. And the way I looked at it with all of these different inputs was simply this. There is a classic bell curve. It's called the bell curve, the innovation diffusion curve. And it is a classic bell curve. We've seen it for grades, right? When we're in undergrad. And we've seen it for any population distribution of any behavior or product. And I simply took a look at I'll call it 40,000 potential points of distribution, right, across just the United States, and said to myself, well, if you apply the bell curve to these kinds of folks, to all these optometrists and fitters in the United States or any market, I did this from Norway. as well. It's like, how many are you honestly going to be able to speak to? Because knowing that myopia management was in the very front end of the innovation curve, it's really, really new. And you're looking for forward thinkers and innovators and very early adopters, people who want stuff soonest, fastest. They're the ones who stay up all night and camp out in front of the iPhone store in 2010, right? So those are those kinds of folks. What are their characteristics and how do you speak to them, right? And how do you speak to them compliantly? And very importantly, knowing that these folks are on the cutting edge of a brand new therapy, how do you have credibility to speak to them?
Right.
Because I'm not ODFAAO, right? I mean, if I have any letters, it's MBA, right? Though I don't use them. But that's a whole nother discussion. But how do you have credibility as a commercial leader, your salespeople, your marketing team? How do you talk to Maria Liu or Tom Aller or Brian Holden, who are these amazing people? How do you talk to them and get through? So it's something interesting. And then they, in their feedback, they teach you something, right? So that's how I did it, was the innovation curve.
Right.
And applying that. And then you start using that to define, in commercial terms, we call them personas. Who are the people you're talking to and how do you speak to them based on where you're going, right? And I knew that you could not just be product oriented. You needed to come with curiosity. You needed to be humble, have humility, and kind of a seeker's mind, right? So there were years I would speak to Maria Liu about, because she is an orthokeratology just genius. But there were years I'd only talk to her about atropine because that was evidence-based. And she taught me a lot about atropine, right? So that was huge. And that's how I did it. And, we have a great relationship now. But, Tom Olive, same thing. He taught me about all sorts of stuff. But you have to be curious and you have to be humble, right? And maybe you're wrong in how you understand your own products work. But understanding that was a big deal. That's how I did it.
Yeah. I think it's really important to highlight too, because, optometrists especially have been burned so badly in the past by certain elements of industry. And in ortho-K and myopia specifically, there's a very protective shield around it from the docs who were doing it, the innovators, the founders, the pioneers, and even stretching into the newer generations are very protective of it. So it's very difficult to even extend trust to anyone who's coming in and saying, "Hey, I have a product. I'm from industry, but I want to learn and I want to, be a partner in this space," because that's easy language. It's easy language to be like, we want to partner with you or we want to support you. But what does that actually look like? And I think that, that pivotal moment from my point of view, when you really came on the radar for me, was with CooperVision, because there had been a lot of problematic stuff happening at that time with different companies. You had, if I'm remembering correctly, there was the thing with Paragon Vision Sciences and Bausch and Lomb, and they had combined and then had to be separated. And there was a lot of confusion and mistrust around these companies and their products. And these were people I had worked with for years, and they had gained my trust. When CooperVision comes on the scene for me officially, there's a lot of hesitancy and raised eyebrows, almost like from the point of view of this is going to be kind of a takeover. But Carrie and I looked at it as major industry being involved is the best thing for us. And we got so much resistance from the industry, from docs who were just we don't want this to be taken over, commoditized, thrown out to the masses. We have made our mark. We want to keep it. We want to expand and grow it. We don't want things dictated. And I want you to talk about that time period at CooperVision, because I think you guys succeeded very, very well at maintaining and gaining that trust and bringing major industry and involving it in a way that really did make a meaningful impact. What part of that strategy, as you mentioned before, is it part of that? And like, what kind of challenges did you face coming into it? Because there were so many things that, Cooper Vision started doing that was like causing us to turn our heads. And like, with GP Specialists, the acquisition, you got Paragon, with the CRT lens. So talk about that time period as far as like really making a mark in this industry.
So I put the success of that and the beginnings of that strategy at the feet of Dan McBride, who was the president of Cooper Vision in the late 2010s. And he was the one who actually came up with the idea of a specialty eye care division for Cooper Vision. And the charter for it was basically to extend Cooper Vision's ability to serve optometrists no matter where the patient was on the spectrum, continuum of care. He handed that charter to a team led by Juan Carlos Aragon, who is amazing. He is amazing. Fantastic leader. Well known in the industry as well now. And very, very keen-eyed when it came to, no pun intended, when it comes to understanding how to have the building blocks of a business that can best serve a customer base. So when you look at the beginning was myopia, right? So that's why Paragon and Procornia in the Netherlands were immediate acquisitions, because now you have leaders in orthokeratology who also have global reach into major markets like China, the mainland China market, as well as strong positions within Europe and a great position here in the United States. So that is kind of the corporate strategy behind it. And then everything else became, all right, how do we help the portfolio of orthokeratology? We have MySight as well as a partner. There was a joint venture for SightGlass Vision, which will hopefully bear fruit. So you can see where from Dan McBride's vision and Juan Carlos's implementation of it, you can see the different pieces of, okay, if I have this disease state, which is an epidemic worldwide, and we all believe this, then we can build the product portfolio and the lab network in order to service this need, right? And have 3 out of the 4 ways of treating this disease. And again, giving the optometrist all the tools that they need and speaking about the category as a category, this whole area of therapy. Once you have that established just in the myopia management space, then it becomes, all right, how do I partner with other organizations? So Cooper Vision was a founding member of the Global Myopia Awareness Coalition. And its sole purpose as an industry consortium is to talk to parents about myopia, right? So growing category awareness. So they were there and they invested in that. Just in the last couple of years, we have the Myopia Collective, right? Which was a fantastic initiative driven in a large part by Dr. Michelle Andrews, who is just an amazing leader in professional affairs, marketing, and industry, right? So she's fantastic. But that was the vision and the implementation from her. So you can see where the different alliances and portfolio thinking come together. And all of this, backing the opportunity to serve patients with evidence-based, everybody knows the FDA indication for MySight, but also the practice of orthokeratology. And then, SightGlass, which hopefully will get its FDA clearance as well. But it was also just thinking about spectacles, right? Which we have Stellus now, which is going to be fantastic. It's going to be a game changer, or it could be, right?
Yeah.
So that's how Cooper Vision thought about it. And it was an evolution of corporate strategy. And when you look at it on PowerPoint slides, and you think about it in, I used to do the, Welcome to Paragon discussion, and I would actually talk about this, right? Welcome to the Valley of the Sun. And on slide 3 or 4, I'm talking about the evolution of Cooper Vision specialty eye care and how it became such a big force for myopia management. And then, of course, irregular cornea with Blanchard and Synergize.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just seemed like, before before Cooper Vision really got going, it seemed like that the U.S. market was kind of being left out of these big pushes. Like all the focus for years was on China specifically, and understandably so, right? The majority of their population is in need of these treatments, higher incidence, all that stuff. And they were taking it way more seriously than a lot of organizations and outlets here in the United States. So for a while, it kind of felt like the United States was being left out of, this big industry push. It's interesting that because I cite CooperVision as part of that push to really bring it back into the United States and support eye care providers moving forward. And, I want to talk about, like bringing on these other companies as part of that initiative, because it's a bold move to start, combining all of these different technologies and tools and products under one roof. And
Yes.
so I want you to talk about that specifically because there's so much involved in that move, right? You had these smaller companies who could only do so much, right? Now, when they're under a larger umbrella with more resources and a larger push, a different kind of relationship with the American consumer. So talk about that if you can, and what the design was for that, if you can.
Yeah. So one of the things that you do or you seek is, we have these smaller labs, and independently they can only reach so far. And we all know that you would have your favorite regional lab, whether it's True Form of Texas, Custom Craft in Nevada, Paragon, which was primarily West Coast at the time. So you'd have that Blanchard, which dominated the Northeast and Eastern Canada. So you'd have that precision up in Western Canada. So you'd have that kind of an approach. But you can only go so far because, size equals resources, right? And attention span, and you can only do so much. So one of the great things that CooperVision did was bring all of this together. That is not trivial. It is not I have a press agreement or I have a press announcement, press release, I sign an agreement and control is shifted. And, welcome to CooperVision. That is the easiest part. That is 5%. The other 95% is how do you bring them in? It's almost like you've got a group of people who have used nothing but iPhones, and then you hand them a Google Pixel phone, and they're like, they don't know what to do, right? So if you are a large company and you're acquiring a small company, you need to bring them in. You need to align hundreds of things. It's literally, the checklist is amazing. And it's things that really matter, but are often overlooked. Payroll, benefits, how you access those. These are things that make life easier or harder for the people that work there. And then you've got all the little mechanisms. You have all of the leadership challenges, right? So how you treat people, you need to be welcoming. That's very, very important. Sometimes people forget that. And people need to want to be a guest in your home, right? They need to want to come as well. So there's all of that kind of qualitative, I would say, if you're a business person. And then quantitatively is, okay, great. So now you have this new lab. It fits into your portfolio strategically. This is why it was on the list. And corporate development went to go talk to them. So now you've got it. And now how do you make 1 + 1 = 3? Well, first you got to retain the people. You do. All right. Because people have worked there their entire lives and they're used to working for this family run business usually. And you got to keep them, because you and I both know that your lab business, it is artisanal. It is bespoke lenses for each eye. That is the biggest learning for anybody coming into specialty or orthokeratology if you're a commercial person, because we're used to billions of lenses running at a time. All right. That's just a thing that happens. And then now you've got someone literally has to follow one lens for this patient's eye. I mean, it's crazy, right? That's a mindset shift, which has to happen as well. So you need to retain the people. Now you've got the products. and you've got overlap as well. So how do you approach the market with that? How do you communicate to the market, this is the place that this product fits within a portfolio? And the reason I'm doing this is to offer more options to you, the ECPs, in order to make faster choices for you and make it more convenient. And that's how we approached it. It's all about the ECP and about the customer, right? So how do we make it? And sometimes we had duplication. So you got to sort through that. And you have to message it as a portfolio. We are your orthokeratology provider of choice. You can come to us for these lens designs. You're still going to get it. It's still the same people who are making them, and you'll still get it tomorrow if you get it in before 3:00 Pacific, kind of thing. So within a certain delivery radius. So you have to take care of that. So you got the people, you got the products and its messaging, and then you definitely have to have your innovation and technology pipeline, right? So you brought this lab or this group of products in. You also brought their R&D horsepower. So how do you build that into your pipeline that's going to be 10 years from now, right? Because when you acquire a company, you acquire its intellectual property, you acquire its culture, and you acquire its brain power, right? So it's really, 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 really important. There are whole courses at business schools about this, and it's really messy unless you've done a few.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be, and, there was a lot of successes in this effort. When I was with J&J, I would go into offices to sell Ability Overnight, and the established lens that were in a lot of these practices was Paragon CRT. And to the point where even if I could get a foothold in some of these practices with a different product, they would call it Ability CRT. And I'd have to sit there and go, okay, well, I don't want to cause an issue, but I do need to correct this, that this is not Ability CRT. But it had become Paragon CRT had become so synonymous with Ortho-K, specifically at this, at this range of treatment. You can talk about it in schools and whatnot. There was a very effective effort by CooperVision to place these key products in from the portfolio into the marketplace, so they became, if not the default, one of the defaults in that context. So I tip my hat to you guys on that for sure, because it made it so much more accessible. I went from talking about Ortho-K with students at different conferences by running a booth if they came up to the Academy booth, and their level of knowledge about myopia or Ortho-K was very limited, but they all knew about Paragon CRT. It was all very familiar. So if they knew anything about myopia, they knew about that, as well as a lot of the other products in the portfolio in different scenarios. But I also want to ask you about some of the hiccups that happened as well. If you don't mind, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot. You can totally turn me down if you want to. But there were key things that happened that got me super excited. And then it just didn't work out. One of them is the Sarah Michelle Gellar as the brand ambassador. I thought that was such a smart move. You're talking about, I'm a nerdy guy. I love Star Wars geek stuff. I play tons of Dungeons and Dragons, in addition to outdoor stuff and sports or whatever. But I'm a very nerdy guy, and she just resonated so well from Buffy the Vampire Slayer in my circles, but also in my wife's circles, being of that age group and whatnot. I was blown away by this announcement, but then it seemed like nothing really came about from it. So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot if you don't mind. I hope you don't hate me for it. But what went wrong there? Because it seemed like such a slam dunk.
Yeah, so that was before my time with the company. But everything you said is true. I mean, if you think about it now, I'm just as a marketer, I was at BTI at the time, and so the head of sales and marketing there. I'm like, oh, that's a good choice for all the reasons you said, right? Mm-hmm. More importantly, because she identifies moms, right? Yeah, and that's who you're talking to. What I will tell you is, for any marketing push for consumers, it is amazingly expensive. I mean, we all joke about how much it costs to run a Super Bowl ad, right? So, but if you're going to do a full national campaign, the rule of thumb, when I would do this years and years ago, was, 30 to $50 million. That is a staggering amount of money, right? So, and usually when you're launching a product, you don't have that kind of a budget, not in eye care, right? So that's why that might not have gotten as much play, because if you think about it, just incredibly expensive. And then think about this, right? So most eye care products go to market through ECPs, right? It's a solution for you, doctor. There's another way to treat this, doctor, right? So at that point, Sarah Michelle Gellar may not be identified by each of these doctors, because the doctor wants someone who is similarly situated to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what it is. It comes down to scale, just the incredible amount of money that you have to put in, right?
Yeah. Can we get back to that point, I guess, is my follow-up question from your perspective? Because when I talk with ECPs about what should major industry be doing, stuff like that comes up constantly. You mentioned the Super Bowl ad, for instance. And I'm like, okay, well, like what else could, because that's the number one response is I want to see a commercial about, what we're doing in this industry at the Super Bowl. Can we ever get to that point?
We could. I mean, if you think about it, one of the things that we studied a lot at SIBA Vision, we prided ourselves for, we spoke to the doctors. Johnson & Johnson spoke to consumers, right? Mm-hmm. Spoke to patients. And
if you're interested in getting the rest of the episode, consider becoming a paid supporter of the Myopia Mindset. In addition to an extended version of this episode and every other episode that we do, you'll also get access to exclusive monthly bonus episodes of the Myopia Mindset. And I know you're interested. You've made it this far. You can do so on our Substack, myopiamindset.substack.com. I'll see you at the next one.